Welcome to BOMA's Building Excellence, a CRE podcast series. This episode is brought to you by Building Engines. I'm your host, Alan Stein. Today we're joined by BOMA Fellows Rich McClure, Managing Director at KWP Real Estate, and Missy Quinn, RPA Lead Green Associate and VP of Global Facilities and Real Estate Operations at Chubb. Rich and Missy, it's great to have you here. We've been friends for a long time, and I'm excited to talk to the both of you about getting the most out of the BOMA International Conference.
Hey, Alan.
Thanks for having us, Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started with
Sure.
a quick game of rapid fire. Are you guys ready?
Ready.
Do
All
it.
right. Missy, do you remember your first purchase that you made with your first real paycheck?
Ooh, I do. I remember buying a brown leather jacket. And I'm not going to lie, guys, I thought it was very snazzy. I think back on that jacket and probably wouldn't look at it twice in a store today. But that was my first purchase.
I actually think mine was the red Michael Jackson jacket from Thriller. So,
No kidding. Thriller.
which I don't still have,
That's amazing.
thank God. Rich, what's the one app you would never delete from your phone?
Ooh. So, again, I know when you guys probably look at me, you say I'm an influencer. Not me. I'm not a social media guy. I'd be nothing without my contacts. But I will tell you, there's another one that is sticking with me right now. ChatGPT.
Yes, very important. Very
ChatGPT.
important in guiding what we do both in business and personally nowadays.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I need
Missy-
any intelligence I can get.
Missy, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who are you sitting down with?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I'm not sure she constitutes as being historical, but I would pick Princess Diana. Would love to just hear from her, like the real story. The real story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Rich,
Yeah.
guilty pleasure snack?
Ooh. So I would say my go-to snack is usually cashews, but if you're talking about guilty pleasures, I'm going to say Reese's Peanut Butter Cup.
All right, Missy, how about you?
I'm a Snickers girl.
All
I would
right.
say that and potato chips are a close second.
I love it. I love it. Well, we all know I'm a huge karaoke fan, and if I were going to go to my go-to karaoke, it'd be anything Johnny Cash, probably Folsom Prison Blues. But what about you, Missy? Go-to karaoke song?
Yeah, I've been known to get up on stage and sing a little AC/DC, "Shook Me All Night Long."
I
I have no fear of doing it, so it's not painless for the audience, but for me it is.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Rich, how about you?
I would say nobody really wants to hear this voice, but if I were to lose a bet, it would probably be Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison or Sweet Caroline. So
Two classics for karaoke. I
Yep.
love it.
yeah.
Love it. I love it. Okay, let's get into our topic for the day. Between the three of us, I'm sure we've attended over 100 BOMA International conferences in the last 25 years plus. Which one or ones stand out as most memorable to the two of you? Missy, how about we'll start with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not sure I could just pick one. Maybe get it down to three. I would say LA for sure. LA was a great conference. Philadelphia in 2024, definitely one of my favorites. Likely because I was involved in planning it and just watching the labor of love from our team go into it was amazing. But my top one, I think, has to be Seattle,
Okay.
and you know why.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into that a little later today. Rich, how about you?
So, that's a kind of a tough question, very much like Missy. There's so many of them and they all have, different aspects to them that kind of resonate. But Seattle, definitely one of them. San Diego, the gas lamp district and having, some fun times
Yeah,
there after hours. Love Nashville. Nashville is
Yeah,
one of the
always great when we're in
classics.
Nashville. Yeah.
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 Who doesn't
But
love
I'd be,
Nashville?
remiss if I didn't say Philly. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, of course. Well, for me, it's actually the one that I didn't attend in 2002 in Toronto because of the birth of my first child. So, but aside from that, I'm proud to say that Long Beach will be 28 of the last 29 years that I've been in attendance at the BOMA International
Mhm.
Conference. So, yeah.
You know, Alan, I think that was a very wise decision on your part to
Yes.
forego the conference that year.
Agree, agree. Thanks, Missy. All right, now let's dig into the value of attending the conference, the BOMA International Conference. Missy, why do you make it a point to attend the BOMA International Conference and Expo every year?
You know, Alan, I think it's what I've gotten out of it, really, right? I think there's no other organization that puts that many professional real estate people in the same room over that course of a weekend. Look, I think the breakout sessions are always focused on what's relevant, what helps us improve our operations. The networking, unsurpassed, right? Being able to just meet people that maybe you speak to on a regular basis on a phone call, but yet then you get to have a face to face with them. And then, there's always the reconnecting with, I'll call them old BOMA friends, right? But I think, yeah, for all those reasons, I love to attend, the conference.
Yeah. Rich, anything you'd add to that?
Um, I think, as I think about my situation, we must always be learning, right? Static is not an option. We can't live in a bubble and expect to succeed. Client expectations are high, and we need to be innovative and demonstrate our value.
Yep.
This could be finding a solution for raising revenue, controlling expenses, and BOMA Conference always offers a solid vehicle to do that.
Yeah. So, Rich, when you look at the current environment we're in today's world, why is the BOMA International Conference the one event that people must attend for those in the CRE industry?
That's a good question, Alan. And I would say, in today's world, we're all expected to do more with less. You know, we need to demonstrate our value to our clients, and we all have different needs, and whether it's simply reinforcing the basics or adding to our arsenal of knowledge, or simply making connections with folks that are dealing with some of the same challenges that we're dealing with in our day-to-day life. That's why it's the one thing that you must attend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll add one issue or one observation on my part.
Yeah.
It's the best of the best in a room.
Mhm.
I don't know what more you could want.
Yeah. That's a good way to put that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Missy, so along those lines, you've got the best of the best in the commercial real estate industry. I call them the SMEs, the subject matter experts. In
Yeah.
your opinion, when you attend the conference, what are the can't miss sessions or events that you really just every year make it a point to attend?
Yeah, sure. I think, I love the Women in Breakfast segment for sure. Always a wonderful speaker and great content that I get out of that. I might be maybe the only person that likes I don't even mind the length of the government affairs committee meeting. So, and there's some other committees, but I think I personally try to focus on things that are relevant to me. So whether it's new technology, now AI's out there, right? So hoping that that will be a big topic of discussion. Anything that's relevant relative to sustainability, right? I gravitate towards things that truly impact me. But any chance a keynote speaker, that's sort of a universal session. People should make sure that they are putting themselves in those rooms and listening to what those folks have to say.
Yeah. Rich, get something to add to that?
Yeah, some might call me crazy, but I love to learn what's going on with other locals around the country.
Okay.
So I'm a huge fan of attending, the committee sessions on Saturday. It's a full day of government relations, emergency preparedness, industry defense fund. And these all, contribute to an incredible source of learning and knowledge sharing, which I think is super important. I also love the state of the industry session, the keynote session, provides, great insight as to where the current market is and more or equally important, what trends are going to impact our world. So,
Yeah.
and then I'd be remiss if I didn't say the trade show.
Yeah.
The folks that exhibit there, are, some cases are existing partners or potential partners, that are there presenting solutions for challenges that we're dealing with. I can't tell you, there's not a conference that I've gone to where I haven't found a solution for something that I was
Yeah.
dealing with at that point in time. So, to me, that makes it invaluable. So,
And I always
Yeah.
love,
I agree with
yeah, and I
yeah.
love it that, again, I'm on the other side, so that I see the two of you every year take the time to walk the show floor, thank the sponsors and the partners that are there, stop by and see everybody, and that really goes a long way. And again, I'm glad that you do see the value in doing that. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yep.
So this brings us to a topic that I hear frequently mentioned by CRE professionals in needing to justify the time and money associated with attending the conference. We know getting budget approval can be a major challenge. Rich, any recommendations on how property or facility managers should navigate those conversations with ownership?
so, I will say, from my perspective, I'm very fortunate that I've got an employer and a client that sees the value of participation and, equally important, sees the value of what can be brought back from the conference. To me, that's super important. Um, that said, I know there are other folks that aren't, in that same vein. They're, so they do experience those challenges, and but I don't think there's a client or employer out there that doesn't appreciate the value of knowledge, that doesn't appreciate the value of network. And, it is tough to, develop that in a bubble, where you don't get to get out there. You don't
Yeah.
put yourself out there. My suggestion, for these folks would be, to plan ahead, incorporate the conference costs, and the cost to attend in your budget. Start the conversation at that point. Minimally plant the seeds, and when you're in the budget cycle. So that would be my suggestion.
Missy, you're in a little bit of a
Yeah.
different
I'll add
situation with different
something.
ownership. What is how do
Yeah.
you look at that?
Well, very supportive. I work for an insurance company. And so we often say the best places for us to get sort of training or as Rich said, knowledge about things that are going on in the industry are to go to the BOMA International Conference and some of the local things that might be put on by I'm local Philadelphia, but the locals put on good content too. But I think to expand on something Rich said is you have to bring back the knowledge. You just can't attend and be exposed to it and not share it. And I think that's what some folks maybe make a mistake of not doing. I think that's a imperative piece of being able to sell to your employer or your client the value that conference brings.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That knowledge transfer and bringing it back,
Yeah,
and that's really what shows the value of you. You not only did you attend this event, but then you've taken the information and brought it back and shared it amongst your team, so and colleagues. That's great. Okay,
agreed.
we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. Building Engines is the operations command center for commercial real estate. It's the single platform where property teams run every task a building needs. From work orders and preventative maintenance to vendor management and tenant experience. Most software gives a snapshot of what's going on in a portfolio. Prism, by Building Engines, gives you control so you can increase NOI. We've spent more than 20 years building operations software that property teams and tenants love. And today, Prism manages over 5 billion square feet across 55,000 buildings. Come find us at the BOMA International Expo in Long Beach, California, and we'll show you what it looks like to run your portfolio from one AI-powered command center. The 2026 BOMA International Conference and Expo is where teams get stronger and problems get solved. Experience the power of connection, learning, and innovation, plus the best expo in the industry. Learn more at 2026.bomaconvention.org. We look forward to seeing you this June in Long Beach, California. Now let's transition to something new and exciting at the conference this year. BOMA's changing things up with the launch of Tech Walks at the Expo. These curated tours of specific booths are designed to give the attendee a more focused experience on the show floor. They even tee up some sample questions because we all know trade shows can be intimidating. This helps attendees know what kind of questions to be asking. Missy, talk to me a little bit about this concept and how you think it will help guide the user experience.
Sure. Yeah, first of all, I think it's wonderful. It's like taking that the bingo card and taking it to the next level, right? Look, I think it's intimidating to walk into that room, especially for first time attendees, right? Where to go, who to talk to, how often, sort of the etiquette, if you will, of a trade show floor. How long do you sit and talk? When do you move on? I think any way that BOMA can help get people through the floor, help them prep with maybe appropriate questions, I think that's a win-win. I think it encourages, especially again, young professionals or even seasoned ones, to kind of know what to ask, right? The vendors are there, they're there, they want you to stop by, right? They're not just standing there kind of waving to you. They want to show off their product and any processes that they're kind of trying to bring to the forefront. So I think the tech walks are fantastic.
Yeah. And hopefully it breaks down a little bit of that
Yeah,
uncomfortableness that a lot of people
sure.
have with just go. I know the two of you don't, but it's a lot of people
Well,
do have that uncomfortableness of going up and just having a conversation with someone they don't know at a
yeah,
company or a service that they're not familiar with. Yeah. So
Is that
yeah.
your way of saying we're not shy?
I've never met someone from Philadelphia that is. Rich, the topic of these
True,
5 guided
true.
tours are centered around tenant amenities, AI, high performance buildings, emergency preparedness, and building modernization. Do you feel that these topics kind of hit the current top of mind issues facing commercial real estate in 2026?
100%, Alan. As many are dealing with, you know, the residual impacts post-COVID, with tenants still operating with a distributed or a hybrid workplace, it's incredibly important, to think about and understand how this impacts our properties. Ensuring that we have, proper tenant amenities to assist our tenants with making the workplace attractive or as an attractive alternative to home. Considering how to deal with emergency preparedness in a world when individuals inclusive of your tenant floor wardens and floor captains might be working remotely a couple of days a week. Also top of mind are the those techie things that I think Missy mentioned earlier, AI and all those things that contribute to potentially a high performance building. And last but not least, knowing when is time to reposition or modernize is the term you use, our assets. So yes, these topics are spot on, Alan.
Great,
Yeah.
Spot on.
great. Well, sign up for the Tech Walks have already been a huge success. So if you're already registered for the BOMA International Conference and want to attend a Tech Walk, you can sign up in your registration dashboard. And if you haven't registered yet, you can add a Tech Walk as part of your registration. We're really looking forward to this being a part of the attendee experience for years to come. As we start to bring our conversation today to a close, I want to transition to an incredible scholarship opportunity named in honor of a dear friend of ours, J. Michael Coleman. But before we get into the specifics of the J. Michael Coleman Scholarship, I want to share one of my favorite memories around who it honors involving the three of us and Mike. And the, both of you mentioned it as one of your favorite conferences, and I have to tell you, it is one of mine as well. And this story really brings to light why it is. So it was 2012 BOMA International Conference in Seattle. A group of us decided to stick around an extra day and take a seaplane to Friday Harbor in the San Juan Islands for the whale watching cruise. It was a beautiful day, and we were fortunate enough to not only see sea seals, otters, bald eagles, but also a pod of orca whales swam right by the boat, if you guys remember. It was just, the weather was so incredible, absolutely perfect. And what occurred that day just speaks the power of relationships we forge with our colleagues at the BOMA International Conference that extend outside the scheduled conference activities and what I like to say create lifelong friends. Missy, Rich, anything that I missed about that majestic day?
Alan, I'll just sort of expand on what you just said. I mean, Mike was an amazing individual. I had known him for about 15 years prior to that conference, but I really believe that that moment on that boat um, really launched my friendship with him. God, it was a treasure to spend that time with him, with all of you. But like, no, not knowing in that moment that we would only have him for another 7.5 years. Um, you don't think about that in the moment, but I've certainly reflected on it years later, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rich,
I
anything?
and I would say, I mean, it truly was an amazing day, and I think the way you painted that picture, just brought back so many memories. Because as I look at my phone, all I have is pictures of, just still water because I was trying to capture the
Yeah,
orcas as they were breaching, and the lag in my camera just didn't catch it. So, but look, and as you said, Alan, it's one of the things that comes out of those, impromptu occasions like this, staying a day later, in the conference speaks to the lasting, connections and relationships that develop,
yeah,
as a result of the international conference.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, Missy, you've been instrumental in your work on the J. Michael Coleman Scholarship since its inception. Talk to us a little bit about what exactly the scholarship is and what it covers.
sure. So the scholarship is geared towards young professionals. I think the sweet spot is 7 years in the commercial real estate sector. And it's really to encourage and give a financial vehicle to young professionals to attend the conference. I believe it covers registration and some other costs that the individual would experience. Look, I think it's the catapult to that conference, but it could change the trajectory of young professionals' life, right? And I know, like in Philly, we try to identify that up and comer or that young professional, encourage them to put themselves out there and fill out the application. I'm hoping other locals are doing that too. Mike loved to teach, he loved to mentor, and he was like an advocate for that next generation. So it's just such a fitting tribute to him to have that scholarship named after him.
Yeah, it really is. Rich, can you share on how important you feel this scholarship is with bringing the next generation of BOMA leadership up through the ranks?
Sure. I mean, it's incredibly important, because as I, look at it, we're not getting any younger. I think Missy's getting younger, but you and I, Alan, not so much.
No, not at all.
And it's that time when we really need to be grooming that next generation of folks, those folks that are going to be sitting in our seat, in hopefully a few short years, because at some point, we do move on. So,
Yeah.
you know, I that's kind of my thinking there.
Yeah.
It's
As
to
as
groom
I
that,
like to say, every time I see Missy, she ages like a fine wine.
right?
Wait,
Rich,
I'm gonna
thank
come back to a podcast in the future if there's gonna be all this flattery.
So anyone who's interested in applying for the J. Michael Coleman Scholarship can visit boma.org/scholarships to learn more about this incredible opportunity. So this has been a great conversation. I have one last question before we wrap things up for today. If there's one key message you'd like the audience to take away from our conversation and the value you personally get from attending the BOMA International Conference and Expo, what would it be? Rich, how about you?
Ooh, okay. So I'm not going to say one. I'm going to say attend, be present, be a sponge, go to the trade show, meet people, develop what will hopefully be lasting and mutually rewarding relationships. That's my bit of advice.
Great. Missy?
Oh, that's a hard act to follow. I think Rich really did hit all the topics. I'll add, have a little fun, sprinkle a little fun in there, network with people, develop relationships. It's certainly easier to make a phone call across, the continent when you've met that person, when you've spoken to that person in person. Yeah, I often say you get what you give. You know, open yourself up, give of your time. You're going to get back tenfold.
Yeah.
Rich and Missy, thank you both for taking time out of your busy day to join me. I look forward to breaking bread with the both of you in Long Beach at the end of the month. And a big thank you to our sponsor for the month, Building Engines. Thank you, everyone, for listening to BOMA's Building Excellence, a CRE podcast series, where the conversation doesn't stop and the industry keeps moving forward. Until next time, this is Alan Stein, signing off.